Hello and welcome to the Infinite Eleven's Anatomy of Horror. Now, film and TV are perhaps the most widely consumed form of art aside from music. And to ensure the art of filmmaking evolves, we as spectators need to become students of film. This series is to celebrate the art of horror filmmaking, as well as pointing out the elements of how it was created. And tonight's episode is part 2 of The Silence of the Lambs, written by Ted Talley and directed by Jonathan Demme, and that's coming up next. In part 1 of Silence of the Lambs, we discussed the many elements of Jonathan Demme's filmmaking style. In part 2 of this episode, we're going to look at a sequence early in the second act that is a great representative of Demme's overall style and how it's used to mislead us in the third act. Then, we're going to break down a scene shot by shot late in the second act to drive home just how effective Demme was at raising the stakes in dialogue-heavy scenes. But before we begin, if you enjoy these videos, then please go ahead and give us a like and subscribe to our channel. It'll help us out a lot and continue to bring you more thoughtful content. So in part 1, I mentioned the style in which these omniscient revelatory scenes were shot and paced. They have this walking, creeping quality to them, and their purpose is to give us more information. And even though these shots are meant to be objective, they often feel very personal because of how personal the entire film feels and its use of POVs. So here's the beginning of a sequence leading up to Lecter's introduction, and like I mentioned in the first video, is littered with converging lines in square or rectangular patterns to set up Hannibal Lecter's visual story. Then we have this shot right here. The shot appears to be filmed on a Steadicam, and since we are already well acquainted with Demme's use of POVs, it seems as though this is from Clarice's point of view. We have this inmate here and these two guards, and it feels like we are following them. But that's not the case, as we now see Clarice and Chilton turn the corner, and the realization that we are not in a POV is a little offsetting. It's a little jarring, but it's subtle enough that, matched with that consistent pacing, never takes us out of the story or calls attention to itself. And notice how the previous scene ends, which adds to the trickery. It's really quick, but we see, out of focus mind you, a patient being escorted by two officers. And then we cut right here. Our eyes automatically go to this patient being escorted by these two officers, and that's because our eyes barely have to move to see it. Because of this, along with the pacing, the POV style already set is an example of how a filmmaker is able to fool their audience by breaking the rules that they've set. So in this scene, we see Chilton explain to Clarice the strict rules surrounding Hannibal Lecter. This is to create intrigue, so what Demme is doing in this sequence, as well as this very scene, is to make you uncomfortable visually. The previous scene gives us the converging lines in square or rectangular patterns to subconsciously put the viewer in prison or trapped. And we know that these two have traveled to the deepest recesses of this institution, and from the dialogue we know why. That Hannibal Lecter is extremely dangerous. Also notice that this sequence does a great job of mixing its shot types. We start with a wide angle pan back and forth for the first shot, and then we cut to an overhead tilt, also wide angle and deep focus to change perspective and give the viewer an idea of how far they'll have to travel. Then we cut to another tilt, but tilting up, shot pulled on a long lens so the focus is really shallow, and even though we're tracking them, and because the lens is long, we can stay subjective, even with the distance. And then back to this scene, and it's probably the best of the bunch, and not only are we back to deeper focus, we were tracking and walking in this shot, the effect given by using a Steadicam. And again, a little bit of deception. The way the previous scene ends, it seems like a POV would be a natural answer since both characters leave the shot at the end. But we find ourselves objectively watching Clarice and Chilton as they get closer and closer. But notice that this prison-style barred door is closing, locking us in momentarily. Then it opens and we have gone from objective far away into the subjective in the matter of a few seconds, quickening the pace and then right back into the objective as we are now in the process of following these two for the first time. That pacing is still urgent, and I love how the scene ends. We are again locked in, but this time for good. Not only does this complete the feeling of being trapped in prison, but it is a change of pace, which leads us to the end of the sequence here, so that our characters can have an intimate moment that allows Clarice to fully realize the savagery of Lecter before she's even met him. Though elements of misdirection are rare in this film until the third act or the climax, this scene is a good example of how Demme uses his consistent style to lull the audience to a sense of safety through consistency. At the end of the second act, when we are shown the house that Jack Crawford and company think is the hiding spot of Buffalo Bill, we have no reason to dispute it. But as soon as we realize that Clarice, not Jack, has stumbled upon Buffalo Bill, we know two things. One, we've been played like a fiddle, and two, Clarice could die soon. As we know, Clarice throughout the entirety of the film is constantly framed as if she's in danger. Whether it be an actual forest or a forest of people or in the belly of a beast, it is continually reaffirmed that Clarice is in over her head. And from a scene earlier in the film, we also know her field training is incomplete and has blind spots. To further the intensity, when Clarice follows Bill into the pit of his cave, the scene looks eerily similar to the cave in which we've seen Clarice interact with Hannibal Lecter, but unlike those scenes, there is no separating wall between her and the undeniably dangerous Buffalo Bill. And since this scene here harkens us back to Clarice's time with Lecter, we know she is being toyed with because she has already been filmed like a hamster in a cage. The cherry on top here is that both Clarice and Bill share a defining moment, and that comes in the form of a familiar motif in the film's most climactic scene. This is Clarice in a scene when she is about to record the findings of an autopsy done on one of Bill's victims. This is the first time Clarice has come face to face with Bill's savagery. During her recording, another agent is taking photographs of the victim that sounds like this. Compare this to the very first time we meet Bill. Before we even see him, we hear this. And then we see how he sees his eventual victim. Everything comes together in this scene, our brave but vulnerable protagonist shot in a familiar way, by the point of view of a deranged psychopath, a point of view that previously ended in him capturing his victim. This heightens the feelings of dread, since we know that the last time we saw something similar to this, Bill won. But let's go back to the first time we see Buffalo Bill, well into the second act. We only see his eyes, and that is such a defining characteristic of this film, eyes. This is a character and performance-driven film, and with a talent pool that includes Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, Scott Glenn, and Ted Levine, Jonathan Demme shoots each actor in a way that lets them perform to the apex of their abilities. In a scene late in the second act, there is a fantastic example of what makes this film so exceptional. The scene is over 7 minutes long, nearly all of it dialogue, so to keep it visually arresting, Demme is going to slowly draw us in and closes in the space on his actors. Clarice is meeting Lecter for the final time, and right away we see the defining pattern for when these two characters interact, and that's the converging lines of the cell that imprisons Lecter. We start with one of the main hallmarks of this film, a POV, that slow creeping pace we've become accustomed to, and then answer with a medium full or cowboy shot of Clarice staring almost directly into the lens, another hallmark of the film. Then we start an A-B pattern, A being Clarice outside the cell, and then cutting back and forth between she and the back of Lecter's head, shot B. And this is as wide as it's going to get. When Clarice gets closer to Lecter, traveling screen left, she moves into a medium shot to match that of Lecter's, and this is also going to be a pattern. We will see that every time she moves to the left side of the cell, she is pulled closer in. So when Clarice tells Lecter, no, I came to see you, game on. I love the blocking here, or the body language we are getting from Lecter. He's hunched forward, defeated, but his eyes still look predatory. But notice how, unlike the previous scenes, he is framed lower than Clarice. That's likely because we know that Clarice got one over on him. I'd also like to mention the performances, and this scene is a good example of a great screen acting. This came out long before streaming, and many people watched this film on a 65-foot screen. On a screen that size, you're going to see every little twitch and slight gesture when you're in a tight close-up, how we often see both Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, and that is just how good both of these actors are. To be able to give such intense performances in a tiny little box where every eyebrow raise must be tempered and measured, because if I raise my eyebrows, in reality, it's a matter of centimeters, but on a 65 by 30-foot screen, it's 6 feet high. So when we see Lecter here respond to being tricked by Clarice, his eyebrows are raised quite a bit, and that's because Anthony Hopkins knows the shot he is in and has the space to do such a thing with his expression. And this is subtle. But we've just been pulled in closer to the conversation and both characters are staring right into the lens. The focus is really shallow, pulling you into the shoes of Clarice and Lecter and showing you how they look from each other's point of view. And like I mentioned in part 1, it never breaks the fourth wall or calls attention to it being a movie because of how personal the entire film is shot. I mentioned eyes being one of the most defining characteristics of the film, and you can see why. The flow of the edit and shot selection in nearly every pattern is designed for us to look into the actor's eyes, and in this scene especially. Our own eyes never have to dance back and forth between cuts to look at the characters. Both characters spend the bulk of this scene center frame, and when we cut back and forth, notice how easy it is for us to see the entirety of each performance, since it wasn't shot with both characters at opposite sides of the frame. We see Clarice move screen left, subtly and slowly bringing us in. So where we once saw Clarice's eyes higher in the frame, we are seeing that equalized. She moves back to screen right, taking us out of it, but Clarice's status is slowly being pulled back to the mean. and it's clear that Lecter is free to play his game, even though he knows he needs her just as much as she needs him, but he knows that she doesn't know that. Now we get closer in on Lecter, because what he is saying is really important to the story and otherwise known as a beat. A beat, to briefly explain, is an important piece of information or action that drives the story forward. Demme directs this beat by changing our perspective from subjective to more subjective. And being this close makes you appreciate the careful lighting. That overhead key lighting that gives Lecter a fallen angel appearance, and just enough fill light to cast a glare off his predatory stare. Even closer still, and Lecter's eyes are creeping toward the top of the frame. And since Anthony Hopkins chose not to blink in this role, or was directed not to, he has the look of a lion stalking its prey and about to pounce. And now we see that Clarice is filmed as she was earlier in the film, when she was totally lost about her role in the FBI. Again, Clarice moves screen right, and to keep us balanced, we are pulled ever so slightly out of the extreme close-up on Lecter. And it's easy to see why we pulled back, lowering Lecter's eyes. He is about to negotiate with Clarice and collect on their quid pro quo. This shot is the only pattern break of the sequence, and its purpose is to up the stakes. We know she only has a limited time, and when we cut back, we are in a tight close-up of Clarice and then another beat, so back to the extreme close-up on Lecter. After Lecter demands Clarice play his game, she submits. Lecter's eyes are again higher in the frame, his mouth lower, cutting off his chin, but the shot is very, very balanced, and giving him an extremely menacing and predatory look. Now, this isn't really a beat, but we are being pulled in extremely close, and that is to accentuate that Clarice is playing the game. She's fully submitted, letting Lecter into her head, the exact opposite of what her other father figure, Jack Crawford, warned her against. And when we cut back again to Lecter, we are even impossibly closer to him, and it is almost mesmerizing. It's hypnotic, under a spell and staring right into the eyes of a wild animal. So a personal beat for Clarice has us being pulled deeper into her performance to finally match Lecter's, and as we push in, we see her eyes higher in the frame, as if her painful past somehow empowers her. And we were going to stay on Clarice in this shot for a very long time, and the performance by Jodie Foster, she's not Lecter, so she is not as stoic or still, but is being asked to tell this painful story in a teeny tiny box. And let me tell you, what she is doing is very difficult. She has to convey pain, regret, helplessness, and it has to be conveyed through her eyes. And her character's motivation or want here is to not have to relive this memory because it haunts her. So here she is, portraying fear, sadness, and regret in the most subtle yet intense manner, unedited. It's amazing. Now we see the pattern continue, this unending A-B pattern, and we find ourselves at the edge of our seats. What started as a personal scene with high stakes finds us so close to the characters we can hardly breathe. No cutaways to break up the action, and no backing away. And of course, Anthony Hopkins right here. No wonder he became an icon after this film. This scene is a masterclass in acting and a masterclass in filmmaking. So there you have it. It's a classic for a reason. The Silence of the Lambs was directed by Jonathan Demme and stars Jodie Foster, Sir Anthony Hopkins, Scott Glenn, and Ted Levine. Until next time.